Alright, this is Nolan Bentley again. I am doing the multicellular heterotroph test review. You may notice that your version of this does not look exactly like mine. Mine's just spread out a little bit. The numbering will be off a little bit towards the end as well. So if you're coming from a different class, just scroll through here until you see something that looks like your question, and then you can hear me go through it. So without further ado, let's get going. This is the key. Oh, that's right. I'm using red letters this time, using the review function of Word. Alright, so fungi. Animals, fungi, and plants are all eukaryotes. Had I put, let's copy and paste it. Okay, didn't mean to do that. Had I put bacteria or archaea bacteria on there, then those would be the prokaryotes. So fungi have chitin in their cell wall. Animals do not have a cell wall. That's why we're so stretchy. Done. And plants have a chemical called cellulose in their cell wall. So fungi are both. They are sometimes multicellular, like a mushroom is multicellular, while a yeast is unicellular. So they're going to be both. All animals are multi, all plants are multi. If you have a single cellular thing that looks like a plant, we call that an algae, which we will classify as protist, at least in this class. So fungi and animals are linked by how they feed. We are both heterotrophs, heterotroph, and consumers. So let's just copy and paste that into animals because we are as well, and that's one of the reasons why we're probably more closely related to fungi than we are to plants, and fungi are more closely related to us than they are to plants. Plants, on the other hand, they make their own food, so we call that autotrophism, which simply means they make their own food, self-food making, and they are producers, referring to the fact that they produce their own food. Now, we do all have mitochondria. All eukaryotes, at least of some, all eukaryotes have some kind of mitochondria. Just go with that. However, only some eukaryotes have chloroplasts, plants, and some protists. That was a yes. Alright, so how's a decomposer useful in an ecosystem? So the ecological role that they fulfill is that of recycling nutrients back into the soil. So they recycle. Okay, let's just erase all that. They recycle nutrients back into the soil. And that's going to be pretty much good for our purposes. If I want to go a little bit more in depth, specifically, some carbon compounds and nitrogen compounds. Most importantly are the carbon compounds. Absolutely most importantly. Parasite is the things that do parasitism. So they are organisms which harm their host. They live inside or on. Prey. So it's not really related to parasite. Prey is what something eats, but it's more than just eat. It's what it hunts. So if you've ever seen well, never mind, you probably shouldn't have seen that movie. But prey is the opposite of predator. It is what is hunted for food. What is hunted. So that's different from like what most fungi do. Most fungi don't go out searching for food. Just dead things happen to stumble upon them, or they happen to stumble upon dead things, and then they just eat what's lying there. A predator-prey situation is where one thing just goes out and eats the other thing. So a scavenger is not a predator, so like a buzzard or a vulture. They just find dead things. They're not predators, they're simple scavengers. The things they eat aren't really prey, they're just dead things. So mutualism. So each of the rest of these is a type of relationship. They are all symbiotic relationships. That means they involve a long-term relationship between organisms. So mutualism is the specific type where the organisms are going to damage each other. Sorry, mutualism, where they will work together for both of their benefits. So mutualism, both organisms in the relationship benefit. Okay, so let me put a space there. For commensalism, one organism benefits, while the other is not helped or harmed. So it's a little bit difficult to find these simply because usually one thing is either slightly helped or slightly harmed. However, if they are harmed, we call it parasitism. So one organism damages its host, or let's just stick with our structure so far, damages the other organism, while it benefits. So something that lives inside of you or on you and in some way damage you. So for example, tapeworms will hurt you. A tick, it burrows into your skin and it sucks your blood. Well, that's going to hurt you, and it will benefit. So it is a parasite, and it is committing parasitism when it does that. That's going to be brought up because there's many fungi and animals which act as parasites towards other fungi and animals, and plants even. So explain why fungi are more closely related to animals than plants, based on the properties in the above table, and based on what molecular evidence? Let me zoom in a little bit. So what we're going for here is that fungi and animals eat the same thing. So we have the same method of nutrition, or we eat other things. The other main thing is that fungi in us have more similar DNA than fungi in plants. So our DNA is more similar to fungi than fungi DNA is similar, or is to plant DNA. So when we compare our DNA, we're simply more like fungi than plants are. That's what it is. So we have both observational, so when we look at it, this and very important characteristic, so how we get food, that is the same. And then when we do the actual molecular tests, including DNA and even protein, it is more similar. So in the end, the DNA one, that's the more important one. The DNA, even things that really don't look all that similar, well, the DNA is going to tell us if they are. So number 5. The difference between autotrophic and heterotrophic is how the organism gets food. Auto is self. Hetero is other. So, that means that autotrophs make their own food or get it from themselves. Heterotrophs eat other things. That's why we are defined as heterotrophs, while plants are considered autotrophs, and why fungi are also considered heterotrophs like ourselves. Let's just put a period listed there for no particular reason. Number 6. Describe the role of fungi and animals in the carbon cycle. Think about our gaseous wastes. So the main thing here is that fungi and animals, we both give off a certain chemical. So we take in oxygen, we combine that oxygen with the food we eat, and then we produce a gas called carbon dioxide. And that goes out into the atmosphere, which then plants can take back in. So let's put that down. So fungi and animals. Fungi and animals take in carbon compounds in food and then release the stored carbon as in the form of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the name of the process we use to do that is cellular respiration. That is how we get our energy. That's why you eat. Or at least one of the reasons why you eat. The main reason. So, number 7. Using the cladogram to the right, or below, I guess, answer the question. So, what has a bony skeleton but not 4 limbs? So, yes, we told you before that you'd see these cladograms all year, and yes, here it is again. Our cladogram is going to show us relationships between things evolutionarily. The labels on here show the development of different traits. So, for example, all of these things have vertebrae because they all come after vertebrae. It's red going upwards. So, all of these have bony skeletons except sharks. Oh, that's weird. Alright, I'm just going to deal with that. Who has an amniotic egg and hair? So here's amniotic egg. That means all these things have amniotic eggs. And here's hair, which means only these things also have hair. So that means for amniotic egg and hair, we're going to say primates and rodents and rabbits. Primates, rodents, and rabbits. I don't know why rabbits didn't get capitalized. You know what? Make the rabbit lovers out there feel happier. Rabbits are capitalized. You're welcome. Who has 4 limbs, but not an amniotic egg? So here's 4 limbs. Here's an amniotic egg. So we can say that, well, everything after here, so all these, amphibians, primates, rodents and rabbits, crocodiles, and dinosaurs and birds, all have 4 limbs. And then, amniotic egg has evolved after amphibians branched off. So there are amphibians. They're the only ones that meet those criteria. Amphibians. Awesome, I spelled it right. Who has a vertebrae but not a bony skeleton? So here's vertebrae. Here's bony skeleton. And, oh, there it is. Sharks. Okay, that makes me think maybe I answered that first one wrong. Let's go look at that real quick. Who has a bony skeleton, but not 4 limbs? Oh, my bad. I mistaked that. That should have been ray-finned fish. That's going to confuse people. It's being a little temperamental here. I'll just type it all out. Ray-finned fish. Cool. Alright, number 14. How would the nitrogen cycle, pictured down here, be affected if all fungi were not around? Alright, so you see that the fungi kind of comprise a very central role in our nitrogen cycle. When things die, or they poop, or do a lot of things, decomposers break down the stored nitrogen compounds stuck in their DNA and protein primarily into simpler compounds that the plants can then pick back up and use to make their bodies. So, if the plants weren't around, well, the nitrogen cycle would stop. It would get stuck. The nitrogen compounds would get stuck. at the ground, inside of dead organisms, and the only thing providing nitrogen into the whole cycle would be these nitrogen-fixing bacteria over here. So really, it would be very bad. So how would the nitrogen cycle be affected if all fungi were not around? Decomposition would greatly slow. Position would greatly slow. This would reduce the amount of nitrogen in the soil and make it much harder for lots of plants to grow. And of course, following that, there would be lots of other consequences. With less plants, that means there's less animals. And so it would just simply slow down everything else. So we really do need these decomposers. Yep. And when I say nitrogen, I do mean to say nitrogen compounds, not just nitrogen. So where do plants get nitrogen compounds from? So nitrogen compounds are from one of two places, primarily at least. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria and recycled nitrogen compounds found from decomposers. So where do plants get it from besides the nitrogen-fixing bacteria? Well, decomposed, let's put a space there, decomposed material breaks down into simpler nitrogen compounds that plants can absorb through their roots. And there we go. Besides that, it's the nitrogen-fixing bacteria which fix it in the form of ammonium and the nitrates into the soil. So where do animals get nitrogen from? Well, we don't eat soil very often, so at least for us, we're not going to get anything from eating the soil. But we do eat the plants, which essentially ate nutrients found in the soil. So we must get it from the plants. Now, if we didn't get it from the plants, we probably ate another animal, which originally got it from plants. So ultimately, plants. Ultimately, the majority of our nitrogen compounds came from plants. Or comes from plants, I should say. Comes from plants. There we go. Alright, number 17, we're looking at what's called a food web. The food web shows energy transferring throughout an ecosystem. The arrows are representing the things eating the thing before it. So let's one way to remember this is that if you draw little teeth on the head of the arrow, it looks like it's chomping down upon the previous item. So the grasshoppers chomp, 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 eat the grass. The mice chomp, 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 eat the grasshoppers. Like that. Of course, it's also spelled out on this paper, which makes it a little easier. So to read our chart, we got our sun producing energy that was stored in elements out in space. Let's not go there. But the plants will absorb that light and use carbon dioxide and water to make glucose and more complex carbon-based compounds. Then the grasshoppers eat those. Now, the grasshoppers, if you had exactly as much grass, and the same amount of grasshopper, the grasshoppers would eat all the grass and then die of starvation. You simply can't have that much consumer for that much producer, because life isn't perfect. When you eat a stick of carrot, you can, at the very, very max, if you were just perfect, you would still only, as perfect as we get, you would still only get 10% of the energy originally stored in that carrot. That's the max. So that's this rule of 10% we talk about. Each time we go to the next step, only 10% of the available energy passes on. So, what would happen in the short term if the number of snakes decreased? We'll come back to that whole 10% rule. So, if the snakes decreased, the snakes, which are eaten by the eagles, so if there's less food for the eagles, the number of eagles would decrease. So, eagles have less food, which is generally going to just result in their population decreasing. Mice would increase. Now, if I asked you what would happen to grasshoppers, you might tell me something like the grasshopper population would drop. But generally, what I care about are the immediate effects in the short term. So, yeah. That's what you need to tell me. The short term. So the most immediate effects. I just look left and right, anything connected to them. If I ask for another creature, well then you base it upon the most immediate effects. In this case, the mice increased, which would probably decrease the number of grasshoppers since the mice would eat them all. What percentage of energy do the mushrooms obtain from the eagle? So we always will be able to obtain 10%, or at max, the most we can obtain is about 10% of the energy in whatever we're eating. So if you had like a mushroom that only ate eagles, it's a weird mushroom, then you'd still only get 10% of the energy out. But however much energy was present in the eagle, you don't know how much, it still only ends up being 10% of that amount. Number 19. What nutrients do fungi provide for the plants? See previous pictures. So when we go back up to these pictures, we see that decomposers breaking down in stuff into ammonium, which then turns into nitrates, or nitrites, which turn into nitrates, and then, it's used by plants. Well, all these chemicals were nitrogen. So what we just summarized those chemicals as are nitrogen-based compounds. Now, of course, there's a lot more stuff going on here than just the nitrogen. There's potassium, there's phosphorus, there's even some carbon compounds which have to stay sticking around into the soil. But for the purposes of EOC star, and for right now, stick with nitrogen, because that's the main thing that tends to limit plant growth on land, is that nitrogen compound. That's why fertilizer contains so much nitrogen. Yes, it has other stuff, but the majority, nitrogen compounds. So for the next ones, we are circling the two systems. That's what most people miss, and why they have trouble with it is because it's got to be two systems. Now, one disclaimer is that before you get to these, there's always going to be complications. I'll try to mention them as I come across them. And finally, I'm only going to be bolding these items, not circling. So you are cold and your body is trying to conserve heat and energy. You shiver and you'll get goosebumps. Now humans, we're not that furry anymore. I guess I'm a little bit more furry than you are. But even when we are pretty hairy, it still doesn't help us too much to make our hair stand up. But if you go watch your dog in the cold, or a cat in the cold, or lots of different organisms, you'll see that when it's cold outside, their hair stands on end. And what that does is, because they fluff up, they trap more heat near their skin, and thus stay warmer. And in fact, if you get them wet and you force that hair closer to their skin, they'll lose heat much faster. And so a wet dog is very scary for the dog, because it can lose too much heat. Alright, so shivering is going to be mostly muscular. And, that's not working. Let's see, what can I do? We'll put, this is weird. And, well, we'll just go with it. And the integumentary, which is going to be what stands up our hair, will also help out. Can I underline it? Ha! That works. Okay, I'll underline them. Next up, you step on a tack, and you pull your foot back before you even realize what is happening. Now, this is a pretty cool thing. These are called reflexes. Reflexes, that whole you did it before you even realized it was happening. It's because the nerves in your leg muscles already have a pre-programmed response. They're like, if I detect pain here, well, I need to move the heck away from that pain. So that's called a reflex. So it doesn't even have to travel all the way up to your brain before you do it. If you touch a hot a very like hot stove with your finger, your arm will jerk your finger backwards before your brain ever gets the message, which I think is pretty cool. So that's nervous, and of course the thing doing the moving was the muscular system. It's also the nervous system that feels the actual pain, so it's got to be involved. Now, yeah, that's going to be the main thing. Your body is making red blood cells inside your bone marrow. So the big thing here is that if you know what bone marrow is, you know it's in your skeleton. Bone marrow is actually where most of your red blood cells are made. Now, of course, it's red blood cells. That's circulatory system. So that's it. So yes, it kind of sounds, since you're making these chemicals, it kind of sounds like endocrine, or I guess even excretory. But it's though these are whole cells that belong to the circulatory system. So it's certainly going to be circulatory. Now remember, endocrine system's got to be hormones, which a red blood cell, which of course probably contains many hormones, is a whole cell, which is more than just the chemical of hormones. Your cells are undergoing cellular respiration, and your body must get rid of the carbon dioxide. Alright, so the way we get rid of carbon dioxide, ultimately, is by respiring it out of our body. The way that we get it to the respiratory system is the circulatory. So I completely understand if you pick that one, and I would totally give it to you. In this case, I've been having my students circle excretory because, well, we're getting rid of waste, and excretory is a number of things besides just urine. But that is the primary one we worry about, is the urine with excretory. So I'm going to go with excretory and respiratory. If you pick circulatory, that is just fine. You are running a mile, and your body needs to increase the rate of cellular respiration. So hopefully you've experienced this before. Maybe you've ran a mile. I don't know if I've ever ran the whole mile because I'm terribly out of shape. But when you run, you have to use up extra oxygen. You're increasing the rate of cellular respiration, which requires oxygen, and it requires the removal of carbon dioxide. So those are both gases, so of course your respiration must increase. Not only that, but the blood has to get the cells their oxygen even faster. And so it will also increase its circulation. Or in other words, the circulatory system will also increase. So, congratulations! Your body is going through puberty. Weird question, yes, but what puberty is when your reproductive system begins to develop. So you become sexually developed, which means you're able to make babies. I don't encourage that. So absolutely reproductive system. But it's not just that. You also tend to grow quite a bit. And the reason why is because that's what your endocrine system is telling you to do. Endocrine system and reproductive system go hand in hand. Absolutely. So, nervous system, let's just go through the functions really quick. It coordinates, oh gosh, my typing. Coordinates body functions that require thought, sensation, so like being able to sense things, and reflexes, which are programmed responses that you may or may not have to, that you may or may not even realize are happening. So reflexes are always going to be able to occur without thought. But that doesn't mean you can't always override them. We'll come back to that in the endocrine system. The primary organs and nervous are going to be our brain, spinal cord, and other nerves. Of course, being things like the nerves that detect touch, heat, and all these other things. Transport this information. I spelled thought right. Alright, so endocrine. Endocrine system's interesting. It is the system that produces hormones in order to coordinate body functions all over the body. So what's interesting about the endocrine system, and this is actually straight from your book, I liked the analogy they said. They said for nervous system, it's like a telephone. It goes from one place to another, just straight there. It's really good at that. The endocrine system is like a radio tower. It just broadcasts over the whole body. So when you hit puberty, you started producing a whole bunch of sex hormones that changed the way your body worked. Well, when they did that, they don't just stay in one place. They go into your bloodstream and they go to every single cell in your body. That's why one of the reasons why things like steroids, which really mess up the balance of your sex hormones, can be so dangerous, is because, well, yeah, maybe you take steroids and your muscles grow bigger, but when you take the steroids, you also may start developing extra large breasts, and really hair starts growing in really weird places, because things that are getting too much of different hormones, because, well, it's just in your blood. It goes all over the place. So that's why I mentioned all over the body. That's kind of the cool thing about endocrine system, is it broadcasts everything. Anything that gets touched by that blood. Alright, so it's the system that produces hormones in order to coordinate body functions all over the body. There is a large number of different organs we need to know for this. I'm going to stick with the main ones in your brain. We got our hypothalamus. We got the thyroid in your neck. And then you got ovaries / testes down in your genitals. So, there we go. The excretory system. Very important. You often may need to use the bathroom during class. Well, most of the time you're going to be excreting urine. And that's because our excretory system removes poison from your body. So next time your teacher won't let you go to the bathroom, just be like, well, but Miss blah blah blah, I have poison building up in my body, and I need to use my excretory system to help me remove this before, it makes me dead. I don't know if that one would work, but if you say it nicely, you probably won't get in trouble. So the excretory system will remove the waste products your cells make. This is primarily, mostly, urea and salt. It's multiple types of salt. It's not just sodium chloride like you've been taught in the past. So it removes waste products your cells make by mixing them with water. So this is why if you don't have much water, then there's a lot more waste for the small amount of water you're able to mix it with, thus making your urine very yellow. If you have a whole lot of water, well, then you have lots of water to mix with the waste you've been making, and so your urine is much more clear. In either case, the kidneys do the removing and send the urine to your bladder. Your bladder then fills and tells your brain when it's full and empties it out through the urethra. Did I spell that right? Maybe. Hopefully. Cool. And so hopefully you know what happens then. Goes in the toilet. Hopefully. That's about, it is full. That should be apostrophed. Thank you. Word. Alright, I think that's good. Alright, so the integumentary system. The integumentary system is your skin. The stuff inside the skin. Inside the layers of skin. This includes sweat glands, hair follicles, and other things. I guess actually etc. means and all, so I don't actually have to put and there. It'd be and all. So the stuff inside the layers of the skin, it's the primary defense of our body. The primary defense against invasion of the body. So it's often included inside the immune system as the first line of defense. So besides that, it also, of course, holds all our parts in, holds organs inside. And here's a big one that a lot of people forget. It regulates our body temperature. Helps regulate body temperature. There we go. There's even a few more things that it does to help maintain homeostasis. Things like it actually excretes some wastes inside the hair and sweat, which will help us a little bit in getting rid of waste material. So the integumentary system actually does quite a bit besides just sit there and make us look all pretty. Oh, that's actually a pretty good one. Makes you look prettier. Go look at somebody without their skin. They're not very pretty anymore. So the immune system is immensely complicated. We're not really going to go into much detail for this test, so I'm just going to go with the simple definition for now. The immune system helps fight off and prevent outside organisms from infecting our bodies. They also help kill our cells that become cancerous. So it may seem like that's not that big of a deal. How often are they killing our cells that become cancerous? But what you don't realize is how often cancers actually occur. That is a constant issue inside our body, and it's something that our immune system is constantly helping us fight off. And a lot of times when you hear things that are like, if you have this gene, you're more likely to get a certain cancer. Well, it's not uncommon for that issue to simply be because the immune system isn't properly identifying cells that have become cancerous. They definitely help quite a bit. So outside organisms, and of course organisms that are growing inside of us. I should just say foreign organisms. That'd probably be the best way to say it. So organisms that are not us from infecting our bodies. And then of course to also help with cancer. So that is the simple definition. Depending on how much time your teacher has had, you'll go into more depth with that later. The skeletal system. The skeletal system is obviously their main job is to provide support, provide places for muscles to work with. So that's why we're not just a flopping bag of goop. It helps us, make pretty shapes. Your face is mostly determined by your skeletal system, not really by everything else. Provide support, provide places for muscles to work with, and here's a weird one. It makes red blood cells, and as well as even some immune cells. It makes some types of cells, including red blood cells, inside the bone marrow. It can even store a little bit of fat. But they're very interesting things simply because there's a number of diseases that can occur in the skeletal system. And so every so often you'll hear about people getting their bone marrow biopsied, which means looked at by a doctor, or even in some cases transplanted bone marrow, which is a relatively new technique that has managed to cure many diseases. It's a very, very good thing that we've managed to develop it. It's not easy to do either. So the muscular system. The muscular system, well, we know this one. It allows us to move. It also performs a lot of involuntary things. So some muscles are voluntary, which means they are able to be moved when you say so. Some are involuntary, and some are both. Like your diaphragm. Well, you don't have to think about breathing, but if you do, you can control your breathing. Like right now, I have to control my breathing in order to talk to you. So that requires actually very fine control, and it's aided by a number of different organs in my body. And most of those organs are actually muscles. Yep. So we'll probably hear more about muscles, especially once we start dissecting our rats and looking at their muscles. So the digestive system, another one we'll spend a little bit more time with later on this year. Hopefully you've covered most of it. I'll walk you through it real quick. Mouth, esophagus. I don't know how to spell that. Esophagus? Yep, esophagus. Oh, that makes sense. Vagus. Stomach. There's a section at the very beginning of your small intestine that sometimes people will mention. I'm going to leave it out just for clarity. But it is called the duodenum or duodenum, depending upon who you talk to. And then, so in the mouth, we chew it up. We mix it with saliva. It starts even reacting there to start breaking down. It moves down our esophagus. It gets into the esophagus is a big muscle tube that pushes the food all the way down into our stomach, where acid and enzymes start to kill anything in it and break down the complex chemicals till they're so small that we can absorb some of them through the wall of the stomach into the bloodstream in order to feed your hungry body. The small intestine does a very similar job to stomach as the stomach. It simply does it to different chemicals. The large intestine mostly absorbs water. And finally you get to the rectum, which makes poop. So, its primary job is to digest, which means primary. Oh, primary. There we go. The primary job is to break down food into nutrients that can be absorbed into the blood, which wraps around this whole system, and is why you really don't want to eat sharp objects, because they might poke a hole in your stomach. That'd be really bad, in other words. Don't do that. Respiratory system, primary goal, to get oxygen into your blood and carbon dioxide out of your blood. We will often summarize this with the following phrase: to perform gas exchange with the blood. The circulatory system actually wraps around all these cells inside of your lungs called alveoli. And that's actually where the oxygen goes into the blood and carbon dioxide leaves the blood. And then, of course, all the rest of the organs are primarily involved with getting the oxygen and carbon dioxide into those sacs. So the diaphragm will push that carbon dioxide back out through through the bronchioles, then the bronchi, into the trachea, then out your mouth or your nose. And then the diaphragm pulls back down, and you suck in fresh air, including oxygen, back into your mouth, down your trachea, into your bronchi, into your bronchioles, and eventually into your alveoli, which then goes into your blood, and the process repeats. And that is our respiratory system. There's some more stuff to it, but that is the primary overview. Cardiovascular. The cardiovascular system, also called the circulatory system, is your heart, arteries, veins, and capillaries. Again, there's a few more things I could mention here, but that's mostly what I'm going to go into. The heart is, of course, the pump that pumps the blood around the body. Heart pumps blood around the body in order to carry nutrients and other materials, most importantly oxygen, around the body. The arteries are the blood vessels going away from the heart. Away from the heart. They almost always will be carrying blood with oxygen in them. Carry blood with oxygen. The veins are blood vessels moving back towards the heart. They are usually carrying deoxygenated blood. I say usually for all these things simply because there's a step where after the blood has entered the heart from the body, it's deoxygenated. Well, it has to get back to the lungs, and the definition of an artery is actually just moving away from the heart. And so in that case, that artery from the heart to the lungs, it'll be carrying blood that is deoxygenated, so the actual reverse of what usually happens. So that's why I'm kind of being careful with my wording here. We do finally have our capillaries, are the smallest blood vessels, which are about 1 cell big, and they are where the gas exchange with the cells surrounding them occurs, where the gas exchange of oxygen for carbon dioxide occurs. Let's do a little bit of spacing here so that I can make sure this is a little bit more readable. Alright, so heart, arteries, veins, capillaries, and let's talk about some interactions. Actually, hemoglobin is the famous chemical inside red blood cells that actually carries the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. On the other hand, we do have lots of interactions with the circulatory system. Since it goes all over the body, it's very heavily integrated with everything else. So I'm just going to list them out here. It is where the food is absorbed into. It's what so from the digestive system. From the endocrine system, it's what carries the hormones. From the respiratory system, it's what receives the oxygen and gives off the carbon dioxide. For everything else, the circulatory system carries the blood to it, provides it the oxygen and all the other materials they need to live. So it's definitely a huge system that's very, very important. So I'm just going to list out those two main ones. Carries the hormones of the endocrine system. Receives the oxygen and gives off the carbon dioxide in the respiratory system. Respiratory system. Absorbs and then transports the food from the digestive system. Oh, and I'm sorry. Carries the immune cells from the immune system. So a huge number of tasks are devoted to it that interact with other systems. So I'm just going to leave those here. You can go look back through them and listen to me talk about them again if you'd like. Finally, we got reproductive system. This one's pretty easy. Simply because, reproductive system is how we make new individuals. How we make new individuals. For females, we got vagina. For boys, we have the penis. And then, of course, inside of those structures, we have the ovaries, which make eggs, or contain the eggs inside of girls. The testes make the sperm inside of boys. And you had a lot of other structures, but those are our primary ones. So, vagina for females, contains the ovaries, which make eggs. Which make eggs. Penis, and testes make sperm for males. When the sperm meets the egg, it is called fertilization. And that was how you were made. Sperm met an egg, and then that resulting cell replicated trillions of times. Well, not trillions. By now, it's replicated trillions of times, and it made all your different cells by turning off different sections of its DNA on and off, and bam, there you are. From one cell at one point, you are now made, which is pretty crazy. So that is our reproductive system. You'll notice I did say it is not just how our cells reproduce, because we do have that process of mitosis, where our cells simply reproduce themselves, but that's not going to make a whole new individual. I can't cut off your finger and grow a whole person from that finger. Well, at least not yet. Maybe one day. But that's not how we work. No, we have to use our whole reproductive tract to do that. So that is kind of a distinguishing characteristic there. Alright guys, I hope that helped. As usual, I will include this answer sheet down in the more info section. I will also include a blank copy of it. And come by, ask me if you need any help. Thank you.